The dojo was unusually crowded that evening. Parents lined the walls with phones in their hands. Students sat cross-legged on the mats, whispering to each other, waiting for the next demonstration. It was supposed to be a routine training session, one of those moments meant to inspire discipline, confidence, and respect. At the center of the room stood a red belt instructor. He wasn't just teaching that night, he was performing. Every movement was exaggerated, every command loud, sharp, and intimidating. You could tell he enjoyed the attention. The way he paced across the mat, the way students stiffened when he looked at them, it all fed his ego. "This is how you learn control," he said, his voice echoing through the room. But there was something off. Instead of calm instruction, there was aggression. Instead of guidance, there was pressure. A few parents exchanged uneasy glances, but no one said anything. After all, he was the instructor. A red belt. Authority. Then a young girl stepped forward. She couldn't have been more than a teenager. Smaller than most of the students. Nervous, but trying to stay composed. This was supposed to be a basic demonstration. Controlled, safe, routine. Something she had practiced dozens of times. The instructor circled her slowly. "Don't resist," he said. "If you do, you'll learn the hard way." Some people laughed nervously. Others looked down. The room felt tighter, heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. In the back of the dojo, a man stood quietly, arms relaxed at his sides. Seagal hadn't said a word since arriving. No cameras. No attention-seeking. Just watching. The instructor grabbed the girl's arm. This was the moment where experience should have taken over. Where restraint should have mattered more than strength. Where teaching should have been more important than proving dominance. Instead, the instructor tightened his grip. Too tight. A split second passed. And then, everything went wrong. What followed wasn't discipline. It wasn't training. It was a mistake that would change the energy of the entire room forever. Because in just moments, confidence would turn into fear, noise into silence, and authority into something dangerously exposed. And when Seagal finally moved, no one in that room would forget it. The instructor's grip tightened. At first, it looked like any other demonstration, an arm control, a twist meant to show leverage over strength. The girl stiffened, unsure whether to resist or relax. Her eyes darted briefly toward the edge of the mat, where parents stood watching, trusting that this was safe. It wasn't. "Don't pull away," the red belt snapped. "This is how you learn." He rotated her arm sharply, faster than necessary, harder than required. There was no pause to check her balance. No adjustment to her size. No restraint. Then it happened. A sharp, unmistakable crack cut through the room. For half a second, no one understood what they had heard. The sound didn't register immediately, not until the girl screamed. It wasn't a controlled cry or a gasp of surprise. It was raw, panicked pain. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her arm, her face drained of color. The dojo fell into chaos. Parents rushed forward. A few students stood frozen, eyes wide, unable to move. Someone yelled for ice. Someone else shouted her name. The red belt stepped back. Hey, calm down," he said quickly, raising his hands. "This happens sometimes. It's part of training. Part of training." The words hung in the air, heavy and wrong. The girl was crying now, her entire body shaking. Her arm was already swelling at an unnatural angle. Any doubt was gone. This wasn't a minor injury. This wasn't a lesson gone slightly too far. This was serious. A senior member hurried over, kneeling beside her, trying to assess the damage. Another instructor whispered something urgently, but no one confronted the red belt directly. No one told him to step away. No one raised their voice. Instead, there was confusion and fear. Parents argued in hushed tones. Some demanded an ambulance. Others looked around, unsure who was in charge anymore. The red belt paced back and forth, visibly irritated now, as if the situation had inconvenienced him. "She shouldn't have resisted," he muttered. "I told her not to." The room didn't feel like a dojo anymore. It felt like a place where something had gone terribly wrong, and no one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. In the back of the room, Steven Seagal was still standing. He hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken. But his posture had changed. His shoulders were no longer relaxed. His eyes were fixed on the red belt, not with anger, but with something colder. Something controlled. He was watching how everyone else reacted. And what he saw wasn't leadership. It was avoidance. The girl was eventually helped off the mat, her sobs echoing as she was taken toward the exit. Parents parted to make room, some shaking their heads, others staring at the floor. The demonstration was over, but no one announced it. No apology was made. No accountability taken. The red belt cleared his throat. "Let's take a short break," he said, as if trying to regain control of the room. "These things happen." That was the moment the silence became unbearable. "Before we go any further, let me ask you something. What city and country are you watching this from? Because honestly, if I were standing in that dojo at that exact moment, I wouldn't be thinking about belts, ranks, or titles at all. I'd be thinking, how did we let this get this far? Why did everyone stay quiet while a child was clearly hurt? And how is the person responsible still standing there like nothing happened?" I know what I'd be feeling, anger mixed with disbelief. Now it's your turn. If you were there, watching this happen in front of you, what would be going through your mind? Write it honestly. As the room tried to reset itself, one thing was clear to everyone, whether they admitted it or not. This wasn't over. Not even close. Because someone in that room understood exactly what had just been revealed. And he wasn't going to let it slide. The dojo didn't return to normal after the girl was taken away. If anything, it felt worse. People tried to act like they were still at a training session, but the energy was broken. Conversations were quiet and rushed. Parents stood closer to their children now, arms crossed, eyes alert. The mats felt colder somehow, less like a place of learning and more like a place where something ugly had been exposed. Near the front, a few senior members gathered around the red belt. Their voices were low, careful. "We'll talk about this later," one of them said. "Accidents happen," another added. "Let's not make a scene." Not make a scene. No one said the word broken. No one said wrong. No one asked the most important question: why did this happen at all? The red belt nodded along, visibly calming as he realized what was happening. There would be no confrontation. No public accountability. The system was already closing ranks around him. He straightened his uniform. "This is why discipline matters," he said loudly, addressing the room. "Training isn't supposed to be comfortable." A few students nodded automatically, trained to agree with authority. Others looked confused. Parents exchanged looks that said everything they weren't willing to say out loud. Steven Seagal watched all of it. He noticed the way the senior members positioned themselves, not between the instructor and the students, but between the instructor and responsibility. He noticed how the room was being guided toward silence, toward forgetting. That bothered him more than the injury itself. Because injuries heal. What doesn't heal easily is a culture that excuses abuse as tradition. The red belt began speaking again, explaining the technique in theory, using words like commitment and control, as if repeating the explanation might somehow rewrite what everyone had just witnessed. But something had shifted. The students weren't listening the same way anymore. They had seen fear up close. They had heard the crack. They had watched an adult get hurt and then ignored. That kind of lesson sticks. A parent finally raised a hand halfway, hesitated, then lowered it again. Another opened their mouth to speak, then looked at the instructors nearby and stopped. The room was full of people who wanted to say something. And one by one, they chose not to. Steven took a slow breath. He had spent his life in dojos, on sets, in real confrontations. He had seen ego disguised as authority before. He had seen people confuse rank with wisdom. And he knew this moment mattered. Because if nothing was said now, the message would be clear. Power protects itself, even when it's wrong. The red belt finished talking and clapped his hands. "Let's continue," he said. "Line up." No apology. No pause. No acknowledgement of the child who had just left in tears. That was when the silence stopped being passive. It became heavy. Let me stop here for a second. Because if I were one of the adults standing in that room, this would be the moment I'd be struggling inside. Part of me would be thinking, just stay quiet. Don't cause trouble. Let the professionals handle it. But another part of me would be screaming, a child was hurt. And everyone is acting like it's normal. If I were there, I know exactly what would scare me the most. Not the instructor, not the belt, not the rules. It would be realizing that silence makes you complicit. Steven Seagal finally shifted his weight. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden movement. But those closest to him felt it immediately, like a change in pressure. He stepped forward, just one step. The red belt noticed. So did everyone else. Conversations died instantly. Even the instructors turned, sensing that something was about to interrupt the script they had so carefully prepared. Steven didn't raise his voice. He didn't point. He didn't accuse. He simply spoke. "Before you continue," he said calmly, "may I ask you something?" The red belt frowned, clearly annoyed. "We're in the middle of training." Steven nodded once. "I know." That was all he said. But the effect was immediate. No one moved. No one spoke. The room went completely still. Because the difference between ego and authority had just walked onto the mat. And whatever happened next was going to change how everyone in that dojo remembered this night forever. Steven's voice wasn't loud. That's what made it impossible to ignore. The red belt looked at him, clearly irritated now. "Sir, we're trying to continue the session," he said. "If you have a question, you can speak to the instructors later." Steven didn't react to the tone. He didn't match it. He simply nodded once, as if acknowledging a formality. "I won't take long," he replied. That calm certainty unsettled the room more than shouting ever could. The senior instructors exchanged glances. They recognized him now, some of them fully, others only vaguely, but they all sensed the same thing. This wasn't going to be brushed aside. Steven stepped fully onto the mat. Not aggressively. Not with ceremony. Just a few quiet steps forward, shoes removed, posture relaxed. The sound of movement stopped entirely. Even the students who had been fidgeting earlier sat perfectly still. Steven looked at the red belt. "Can you explain," he asked evenly, "why that technique required that much force?" The red belt blinked, caught off guard. "It's a control technique," he said. "If the student resists, pressure is necessary." Steven tilted his head slightly. "Pressure," he repeated. "Or control?" A pause followed. "It's the same thing," the instructor said quickly. Steven didn't argue. He simply extended his own arm. "Show me," he said. A ripple moved through the room. Parents leaned forward. Students held their breath. The instructors stiffened. The red belt hesitated. "I don't think that's appropriate." Steven smiled faintly, not amused, not mocking. "Patient. I'm not asking you to hurt me," he said. "Just demonstrate what you demonstrated earlier." The red belt glanced toward the senior members. No one stopped him. If anything, their silence felt like permission. He took Steven's wrist. Immediately, Steven adjusted his stance, not to resist, but to align. It was subtle, almost invisible. The red belt applied pressure, the same twist, the same motion. Nothing happened. Steven didn't flinch. He didn't tense. His arm moved with the technique instead of against it. "Again," Steven said calmly. The red belt tried harder this time, tightening his grip. A hint of strain crossed his face. He expected resistance. Pain. A reaction. Instead, Steven stepped forward, just a half step, and the pressure disappeared. The technique collapsed. Stephen gently removed his arm from the grip and stepped back. "You see," he said softly, "control isn't about strength. It's about timing, balance, and responsibility." The room was silent. The red belt's confidence had evaporated. He looked smaller now, uncertain. Stephen wasn't finished. "Now," he continued, "let me show you something." He took the red belt's wrist, not aggressively, not suddenly. Slowly, deliberately, he applied the same technique. But this time, it looked different. There was no force, no strain. Yet the red belt froze instantly, eyes widening as his balance disappeared. His knees bent involuntarily. Not from pain, but from control. Stephen stopped before it went any further. He released the grip. "That," he said, "is how you keep someone safe." No one spoke. "If I were standing in that room at this exact moment, I know what I'd be thinking. I wouldn't be impressed by the technique alone. I'd be stunned by what wasn't happening. No shouting. No humiliation. No revenge. Just a quiet demonstration that exposed everything. If I were there, I'd be thinking, this is what real authority looks like." Stephen stepped back again, giving the red belt space. "This isn't about embarrassing anyone," he said. "It's about understanding what your responsibility is when someone trusts you." The senior instructors shifted uncomfortably. They could no longer hide behind procedure. The truth had been shown, clearly, publicly, and without cruelty. The red belt stared at the mat. For the first time that night, he said nothing. And in that silence, everyone understood something important. Power doesn't need to raise its voice. It had already spoken. No one clapped. That alone said everything. After Stephen stepped back, the room stayed silent, not awkward silence, not confusion, but a heavy stillness where everyone was processing what they had just seen. The kind of silence that follows truth, not performance. The red belt cleared his throat. He tried to stand straighter, but something fundamental had changed. His posture still showed rank, but not command. His eyes avoided Stephen's now, drifting instead toward the senior instructors, silently asking for rescue. One of them finally spoke. "That's enough," the instructor said, forcing a smile. "Let's take a short break." But Stephen didn't move. "I'd like to finish," he said calmly. The instructor hesitated. The room waited. Stephen turned back to the red belt. "You said earlier that training isn't supposed to be comfortable." The red belt nodded quickly. "That's right." Stephen met his eyes. "Discomfort teaches awareness," he said. "Pain teaches fear. Do you know the difference?" The question hung in the air. The red belt opened his mouth, then closed it again. No answer came. Stephen continued, voice steady. "When someone trusts you with their body, especially a child, you carry responsibility. Rank doesn't excuse that responsibility. It increases it." Parents shifted. Some nodded slowly. Others clenched their hands, as if wishing they had spoken sooner. The senior instructors could no longer pretend this was a private issue. One of them stepped forward. "We'll review what happened," he said. "This isn't the place." "It is the place," Stephen replied, still calm, still respectful. "Because this is where it happened." The instructor stopped talking. Stephen turned toward the students now. "Not lecturing. Not preaching. Martial arts isn't about proving you're tough," he said. "It's about learning restraint when you could hurt someone." He gestured toward the mat. "Anyone can break something. That takes strength. Keeping someone safe takes discipline." The red belt's face flushed. His jaw tightened. "But she resisted," he said suddenly. His voice was defensive now. "I followed procedure." Stephen didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue emotionally. "Procedure without judgment is dangerous," he replied. "And resistance is information, not an invitation to punish." That was when one of the parents finally spoke. "She was scared," the woman said quietly. "She told you she was scared." The room turned toward her. The red belt looked shocked, almost offended. "This is a dojo," he said. "Fear is part of learning." Stephen turned to him slowly. "Fear of failure teaches growth," he said. "Fear of injury teaches silence." That sentence landed hard. No one disagreed. If I were standing there as a parent, this is the moment I know I wouldn't forget. I'd be thinking, why did it take an outsider to say what we were all thinking? I'd be asking myself, would I have spoken up if he hadn't? And honestly, this is uncomfortable to admit, but part of me would feel guilty. If I were there, I'd promise myself something in that moment. I won't stay quiet next time just because it's easier. Stephen looked back at the red belt. "I'm not here to attack you," he said. "But if you don't reflect on this, it will happen again." The red belt swallowed. For the first time, his voice dropped. "I didn't mean to hurt her." Stephen nodded once. Intent doesn't undo impact. Another pause. One of the senior instructors stepped forward again, this time without authority in his voice. "We're suspending the session," he said. "Effective immediately." A quiet wave of relief moved through the room. Students began to stand. Parents gathered their children closer. No one rushed. No one argued. The red belt remained where he was, staring at the mat. Stephen turned to leave. But before he did, he added one final sentence, quiet, but impossible to forget. "The way you treat the weakest student," he said, "is who you really are." Then he walked off. The mat, and no one stopped him. And no one forgot what they had just witnessed. The dojo didn't erupt into chaos after Stephen left. It did something worse for those who had tried to contain the situation. It changed. Parents didn't rush out immediately. They stood in small clusters, whispering, not gossiping, but processing. Some were shaken. Others were quietly angry. A few looked ashamed, replaying the moment they chose silence over confrontation. The senior instructors retreated to the far side of the room with the red belt. Their conversation was hushed but tense. No raised voices. No dramatic gestures. That told everyone everything. This wasn't being brushed aside anymore. One parent pulled out their phone, not to record now, but to text. Another followed. Then another. Within minutes, messages were being sent to group chats, friends, family. "You won't believe what just happened." Seagal stepped in. He exposed everything without hurting anyone. Outside the dojo, the night air felt heavier. Stephen stood near his car, speaking quietly with one of the instructors who had followed him out. The man's posture was completely different now, shoulders lowered, voice careful. "I didn't recognize you at first," the instructor admitted. "But when you stepped in, we realized." Stephen nodded. "That's not important." "It is," the instructor said quickly. "People listen to you." Stephen looked back toward the building. "They should listen because it was right," he said. "Not because of who I am." Inside, the red belt sat alone on the edge of the mat. The authority he'd worn so comfortably earlier now felt heavy, almost embarrassing. Students avoided his eyes as they packed up their gear. Parents didn't glare. They didn't argue. They simply didn't acknowledge him at all. That absence of respect hurt more than any confrontation could have. One of the senior instructors finally spoke clearly. "We're filing an incident report," he said. "Until it's reviewed, you're suspended from teaching." The red belt nodded stiffly. No protest. No excuses. He knew the moment had passed. If I were standing there as one of the students, this would be the part that stayed with me forever. Not the technique. Not the tension. The consequences. I'd be thinking, so this is what happens when someone finally speaks up. I'd realize that authority isn't permanent. It's conditional. If I were there, I'd walk out believing something important. Silence protects harm. Speaking up exposes it. The story didn't stay inside the dojo. By morning, parents were sharing it online, not with exaggeration, not with rage, but with clarity. They described what they saw, what was said, and how quietly powerful the moment had been. Comments flooded in. This is how martial arts should be taught. Real discipline means restraint. That man showed more control than anyone else in the room. Only later did many readers realize who Steven Seagal was. For some, it added weight. For others, it didn't matter. The message stood on its own. The dojo released a brief statement that afternoon. Training was paused. Policies were being reviewed. Safety protocols would be reinforced. No names mentioned. But everyone knew. The girl's family issued their own message. She was recovering. She would heal. But they were grateful someone had stepped in, not as a celebrity, not as a fighter, but as an adult who understood responsibility. Steven didn't comment publicly. He didn't need to. Because the most powerful thing about the incident wasn't who spoke, it was how he spoke. Controlled. Unavoidable. The dojo would reopen eventually. But it wouldn't be the same. And neither would the people who were there that night. The girl returned to the dojo weeks later. Not to train. Just to watch. Her arm was still in a sling, and she stayed close to her parents, but she walked in without fear this time. The room looked different. The mats were the same, the walls unchanged, but the energy had shifted. Posters about safety and responsibility now hung near the entrance. 2 new assistant instructors stood beside the senior staff, quietly observing every class. The red belt was gone. No announcement had been made about him. None was needed. What mattered was what replaced him. Before the session began, one of the instructors addressed the students. "We don't train to dominate," he said. "We train to protect. If something feels wrong, you speak up. Rank doesn't silence truth." The students listened. Not out of fear. Out of understanding. Steven Seagal wasn't there that day. He didn't need to be. His presence had already done its work. Parents watched more closely now, not suspiciously, but attentively. Students asked questions they never would have asked before. Techniques were slower, more deliberate. Instructors corrected each other openly. Accountability had become normal. Outside the dojo, the story continued to ripple. It wasn't framed as a scandal. It wasn't turned into outrage bait. People shared it because it reminded them of something simple and powerful. Real strength shows restraint. Messages came in from instructors around the world, karate schools, judo clubs, jiu-jitsu gyms, people reflecting on their own teaching methods. Some admitted they had been too harsh. Others realized they had stayed silent when they shouldn't have. One coach wrote, "I watched this story with my students. It changed how we talk about control." That was the real impact. Not humiliation. Not punishment. Growth. Steven never took credit. When asked privately why he stepped in, his answer was brief. Because someone needed to. That was it. No speech. No legacy talk. Just responsibility. Now let me ask you something, and don't skip this. Stories like this aren't really about celebrities or dojos. They're about moments you and I might face someday. A moment where staying quiet is easier. A moment where speaking up feels risky. A moment where someone weaker is being hurt, and everyone is watching. So here's the question I want you to answer honestly in the comments. If you saw something like this happen in real life, would you speak up? And if this story made you think, even for a second, about responsibility, respect, or courage, then do this. Type respect in the comments if you believe strength should protect, not harm. Like this video so more people see stories that actually matter. Subscribe to the channel if you want more powerful, true-to-life stories about justice, discipline, and standing up when it counts. Because silence is easy. But respect is a choice. And sometimes, it only takes one person to make the room go silent and change everything.